Welcome back to the Elevate podcast, where we unpack what actually drives growth and full census in behavioral health. Today, I'm joined by Ken Huey, CEO of the Hope Group and host of the Voice of Hope podcast. Ken is known for his disciplined, no compromise approach for leadership, hiring, and treating culture not as a buzzword, but as the actual infrastructure that either supports growth or causes an organization to collapse. With decades of hands-on experience leading behavioral health organizations, Ken shares how strong teams, clear standards, and leadership focus directly influence admissions performance, census stability, and overall long-term scalability. Welcome to the LA podcast, Ken.
Gary, it's really nice to be with you.
Great to have you here today. So, why don't we give the listeners a brief overview of the Hope Group, your subsidiary, specialization, and feel free to sprinkle in, what made you join the organization and what particular opportunities made you think like, now this is worth building.
Sure. Well, thanks, Gary. Yeah. I started off after finishing a PhD in marriage and family therapy as just a therapist, but moved into administration fairly quickly. So I only did 2 years of direct client contact, and then I was administering and ultimately then an executive director, and then built a place called Kalo in Missouri, which was residential treatment for teenagers that had pretty significant trauma. So built that, and it was just an amazing team. Really, really had a great time. And ultimately sold and left in 2015 as it was becoming Embark Behavioral Health. And the Hope Group found me, that kind of made me known in the field, and they were trying to really get Havenwood Academy, their only subsidiary, that the Hope Group wasn't they had the entity, but it wasn't doing anything. And so they wanted to know, what do we do to get Havenwood doing well, and what's the next steps after that? And so I joined, and we started working on that in 2020, and it's gone very well to where now we've got 4 different subsidiaries. We've got a young boys and a young girls residential treatment center, one in Salt Lake City for the boys, and one in Cedar City, Utah for the girls. We've got a young adult kind of launching program in Cedar City with about 20 to 23 or 4 young adults that are trying to get into college, just learn how to launch in terms of, into life, and have usually various kind of trauma issues or family of origin stuff. And, they're just not thriving, and we help them kind of get there. And then we've got a young adult, 18 to 25 or so women in Salt Lake City that have usually pretty significant trauma in the area of rape and sexual abuse and stuff like that, led all by women, for women, and that's also going terrifically well. And that's the entire suite of the Hope Group. And my desire to do it has a lot personally to do with kind of how things went for me at a young age. I was adopted and had pretty significant traumatic experiences growing up, an ACEs score of 7 for the viewers and listeners that know about that, and always wanted then to kind of help what I saw as my people, and that's the focus of the Hope Group then.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing, and thanks for the great work that you're doing as a father of a teenager, and seeing it from that lens is so powerful, and to help families in that way, it really has a ripple effect. So thank you for the Hope Group and for growing all the subsidiaries. Now, I'm curious, like with your approach and your experiences, when you first stepped in, what were some of the things you identified as these were areas of improvement opportunity, or what needed to be fixed as priorities to align the scale with your vision?
Yeah, it's interesting because in the residential treatment world, in outpatient, young adult, all these different venues, it's typically well-meaning therapists, sometimes some business office person, but usually it's a therapist wanting to build something to reach more people. And there's very, very wide-ranging degrees of sophistication in terms of business. Well, I grew up in a household of entrepreneurs with aunts and uncles on both sides. Everybody owned their own business. It seemed like at least half of all of my extended relative. That's kind of the world that I grew up in. And so I was always studying that, and never went and got an MBA. But my early conversations with my dad were driving in the car and seeing some new pizza shop go up in kind of a weird location, and him saying, "Yeah, it's about location first. That's not going to succeed, and here's why." And then it being dead 6 months later. And so years later, I'm saying to my dad, "Oh, that's not going to work. That's a bad location for X business." So that was kind of the family conversation stuff. And then I started looking at, the best thought leaders in business building, and reading Jim Collins, and looking at personal development relative to Stephen R. Covey, and paying attention to EOS and traction, and just realizing that there was a lot of good-hearted people that could use really scalable culture and business ideas. And I think that's what's missing. And there's a lot of really good people, not rigorous in their application of business principles to the space.
Amen, brother. Amen. We see that every day also too with Elevate, great practitioners, with clinicians, therapists, with the world-class intentions, focused on outcomes, very patient-centric, but how they, whether it's a patient acquisition strategy or the structure or operations, then that's where they need help to really expand the reach and make a larger impact. So thank you for that. And by the way, those books and authors you mentioned, they're like top 10 on my list. So you're preaching to the choir on that. So you stepping in, and I know from previous conversations, you're strong on culture. How have you adapted a culture change? What did you do to operationalize it, so to speak, when stepping into the Hope Group?
Yeah, if you're going to change the lives of anybody, we know from a lot of really sophisticated analyses that the thing that creates change accounts for most of the variance is the relationship between therapist and client, or direct care providers and client. So that group becomes massively important, and they must be on the same page with where I'm trying to lead and where the rest of leadership team is trying to go. That's about culture. And how do you rally around an idea that has everybody being missionaries, not mercenaries? I'm not here to just get my pay. And in fact, if I don't like the pay, I'm gone. And it's more about, oh my gosh, I have an ACES 6. These are my people. I want to more this venue. So finding the rallying points and truly building that energy that draws in the people that feel it, and quite frankly, spits out the people that don't feel it. Mercenaries comfortable in a missionary environment. They're like, what the heck? You're willing to spend an extra hour without pay just because the group's going a little bit long? Screw you. I've got a football game I want to see. That doesn't stand when you've got good culture. And before you know it, those people are gone, and they're replaced by people who will support culture. That culture just makes the business thrive.
Love it. So mercenaries versus missionaries. How do you detect mercenary versus missionary, like either in interview screening process, hiring, or performance evaluation when you enter the organization? Is there any tips that you could share with our listeners?
You bet. I do think that we wildly overvalue the interview process and believe that we've got these sophisticated internal questions and things that we can do to sniff out whether somebody's a mercenary or not. And that's not actually super reliable. That said, there are some things that will expose somebody if they're talking in the interview about pay within the first 3 minutes. That's mercenary behavior. If they want to know, if you're hearing them talk about work-life balance, it's work-life integration. Work is part of life. And if they're focused on that, they're focused, they're kind of mercenaries. But we still overvalue that interview. And I've had a number of occasions. We had a clinical director that I just didn't know if they were going to be a fit. I was kind of everybody else was a little more excited. And I said, well, then we got to do the top grading. We've got to do the ask other people what this person's like to work for and with. That's a better predictor. So the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. If somebody was a mercenary in a past life, they will be a mercenary now. They just will be. They're not going to change their stripes. The tigers don't change their stripes. And so we have a policy that the frontline staff, we're going to talk to 3 people that aren't all fed to us, that worked with this person, for them, or with them, to find out what they were like, with very specific questions. If they're in a director level position, we're going to do it with at least 5. And if it's an executive position, at least 7. And we're asking specific questions about what's it like to work with this person. How do we sniff out their belief in the culture and what they did? And if we're getting descriptions of missionary behavior, of excitement about the team, of being a team player, having crucial conversations in productive ways, of giving back instead of always taking, if we're finding that we're getting the right qualities and attributes, that is the person we want to hire.
Amen. And that's so difficult to actually execute upon, right? I think there's so many books, Culture Eats Strategy, and Lasso Brooks' work rules from Google I read, and about standardizing it. But the further you go up the chain of executives, the better they also are at selling themselves, understanding, positioning. Right? I've found that. So I love the referrals, and then actually not just talking about what systems or KPIs or direct reports, but actually talking about behavior, attributes, attitude, basically. So powerful. If you is there ways now? I'm also just curious from my standpoint. I know you could do employee satisfaction surveys, you can measure engagement, you can promotion, attrition. There's a lot of metrics, but is there a way to specifically measure culture from a operational standpoint? If I was an executive at behavioral health, I would say, this is interesting. How do I gauge the culture within my organization?
I think that the single best metric is a net promoter score. And yes, most viewers will know something about this for sure, but if you don't, you look it up real quickly. Basically, it's a scale of 1 to 10, a question like, if I'm an employee, how likely am I to go out and recommend that my family member come take a job where I am? If I score a 9 or a 10, I'm a promoter. If I score a 7 or an 8, I'm passive, not bad, good. 6 and below is a detractor. And so you use those with very simple math. I won't get into it to come up with a net promoter score. And if you've got a net promoter score where you're getting more of those detractors and just not very many promoters, that tell you your culture is broken. You need to be really at a 0.20 at a minimum, but a 0.40 or better is like really, okay, we're humming along nicely. The old CEO of Southwest was being interviewed, 25 years ago, probably, when Southwest was just absolutely incredible. And their net promoter scores were always really high. And he was being asked, I think by Forbes, I'm not sure which magazine, but what makes you most nervous as a CEO? And it was fascinating to see what he'd say. Is it fuel prices going up because every 10 cents is millions of dollars that they lose in profit? No. Is it plane crashes, for crying out loud? No, that's not my fear. That's not the thing that wakes me up. The thing that wakes me up at night is we might lose our culture. What could hurt our culture? I remember getting on Southwest when they're telling jokes over the intercom. They are excited to be there. You wanted to fly Southwest just to have a freaking comedy hour for an hour and a half while you flew to Dallas. It was incredible. So that's what you're trying to find. And a net promoter score, I think, is the best metric for that once you're going.
I love it. I mean, I know it specifically from a customer standpoint in terms of client engagement and asking for the net promoter score, but I never flipped it around from an employee and team standpoint, which makes perfect sense. If they're willing to recommend their best friend, acquaintance, family member for a job, then they're putting their word behind it. And I think thanks for sharing that. I'm gonna look into that internally as well. Now, so from my experiences, and obviously that's a whole other conversation, but very often you experience growth, and growth comes with staffing for all different departments, and whether it's therapists or admissions counselors or BD reps. Now, having that balance from a forecast standpoint versus your census and break even, I mean, that's a whole machine to make sure that it's sustainable. What I've found and myself challenged, but also many fellow entrepreneurs and clients is, how do you make sure that you balance that urgency with finding the success of another hire, or then the next to expand the team, while sustaining that culture and ensuring that they buy into it.
Yeah. So this is where that interview process becomes so darn important. Zappos, the shoe place, would pay, I think it was $2,000 to people who would quit after 2 months of training and being on the job. Hey, we're going to give you $2,000 just to go away.
Yeah.
Wait, what? You've probably heard this story. I mean, what a brilliant way to find out who's a mercenary and who's a missionary. So, you're just always pressure testing and making sure that you're finding the right person. And then again, you've got to have an interview process that's robust. I would recommend Topgrading. We do a modified version of the Topgrading model. It's very extensive, but we use pieces of it, including the interview and the references check, where they give us 2 to 4 and we find others and go check on them to make sure that we're hiring for qualities and attributes first, skills second. There's kind of a minimum bar of skills, but I can train skills. I can't train qualities and attributes. So I got to be really good at sniffing that out. And the Topgrading does, I think, a really phenomenal job on helping you get there so that you don't do things that harm your culture. And it's painful. It takes longer to make every single hire. It takes longer. But you think about the organizational cost of losing one person that's been going for 6 months, and they're pissing and moaning behind the scenes because they're a mercenary, and they're talking about the boss doesn't know what the hell they're doing, and they're spending money over here and they shouldn't, and they sow discontent and create ripples in the culture that is a cancer. Then you finally get rid of them. If you spend the extra 2 hours for up, that's all it takes us for a director level position. It's an addition 2 hours to do it the way I'm talking about. I spend that money on the time on the front end. I save myself weeks of recovery and months of recovery from a bad hire.
I love it. I love it. Again, it's one of those things that's so difficult to execute upon when you got managers and they're overloaded or overworked, which is very common in our industry, and at the same time thinking long term and ensuring that you're not bringing cancer into the organization. The reference checks, I love it, and very similar. In my book, I have a similar approach with customer success. Sales reps was like, here's the top 25 attributes to look for, because a skill, maybe they don't have it, but if they've been passionate about a sport, a certain school project, they've thrown the heart and soul into that. They have demonstrated to go beyond in something they believe. If that can then get translated into the profession, and they're aligned with the big why, then they will learn the skills. But to your point, you can't change attitude and attributes typically. So I like that. I found it difficult to do across all different kinds of position, and then hiring managers, but that's a whole different podcast episode.
Yeah, well, I would say that it is a heavy lift. I don't want to ignore that, but we're so committed to it that, for instance, my chief financial officer, chief operations officer, is a very, very busy guy, and he winds up hiring pretty key folks. And he's so busy that I'll jump in. The CEO is making reference check calls with some frequency. It's so important that I'll take an hour out of my time to chase down and finally get these 4 people and record what they have to say to make sure that we get the right fit. And we're nailing it on the hires. Better and better and better every single time we do it. We've gotten really good, and we are getting A players. And Tricia, our controller, we will not have to replace her, but we've had her for a year and a half, and she's a freaking rock star. And that saves us all kinds of time, not just with production right now, but we never have to part ways in some crummy way and have it ruin culture for a while.
Fantastic. I'm going to try to live by those words as well as to make myself available for reference checks if it's not done. You got to drink the Kool-Aid, right? So if you're a behavioral health organization and you're looking to scale in your session, your culture, what are some of the pointers based on your own experience that you would direct them? Here's a couple of first good steps. You mentioned a lot of different books, structure, systems, operational systems. Is there anything you would highlight more than something else than as a good first step?
Boy, I like that question. The first thing that jumps to my mind is actually one concept out of Good Great by Jim Collins. I know you're very familiar with him. And it's the idea of who, then what. So I have to learn this over and over again. I wish that I would just get it the first time. But we run into obstacles. There's the theory of constraints. Alex Hormozy talks a lot about this. We went and spent a couple of days in his acquisition group, and down in Nevada. It was incredible. And over again, he's like, okay, what's your constraint? Always be thinking of what's your biggest constraint, solve for that, and then another one will pop up, and you'll slowly go through the hardest things to get to where you're really moving in quick speed. Great. So that theory of constraints pops to mind, and then the idea that I keep running into a wall, and we have strategy sessions, and we're trying to figure it out once or twice, we've got a who problem, not a what problem. And I want to go solve it with my team. We're a bunch of smart people, but if we haven't gotten there with a couple of strategy sessions, we need to go find the right person. You got to get the right who, and they'll blow this thing out of the water. So if it's a big enough constraint, if it's slowing the business down, stop solving it at the executive level and get the right person that can move that thing and really take it to the next level. It needs to be not just a problem, but an opportunity that I can solve for this, and revenue increases. That person will pay for themselves 15 times over. Pay for the freaking who and get that person in the seat, put them on the bus, and off you go.
I love that. Get the right people on the bus and then figure out the seat subsequently. I think that's also why many successful organizations, you see a lot of cross the departmental transitions of key executives that's performed, because I can see within my organization I had a problem with some IT infrastructure thing we had to solve, and I took a person that had never touched it but just went all in just to solve the matter with just a few sessions. At the same time, I'm also reflecting on some scenarios where we keep going back to the same issues list and it never gets resolved. And essentially it's like, do you have the right person in the right seat? Essentially,
I would say too that it isn't always a full-time hire. I sounded like that and was kind of thinking with that while I was talking. Sometimes the right who is just a fractional person, a fractional CFO, a fractional IT person. We kept running into a constraint with a bunch of coordination and audits and stuff that just weren't getting done. And we hired then a virtual executive assistant out of the Philippines for $10 an hour. $10 an hour. Initially for just a few hours. She's now full-time at $10 an hour and probably pays us $150 an hour in benefits every freaking day. So there's ways to skin that cat. My point is, if you've got a big problem that keeps stopping you, it's a who issue likely. Get a consultant, get a coach, fix the who problem. So
I like that. Now, when I'm thinking culture, and I'm thinking a lot about my participation at various behavioral health conferences, everything from therapy focused to private equity and investor, CEO, executive level to the business development conferences. And I feel like, this is just my opinion, I show up and it's almost like I'm seeing different audiences, and I have conversations, and the perspective on something from a patient and outcomes to, it's just widely different. And sometimes I'm thinking, is that a cultural aspect, or is it just because that's how the industry is, that it's not important to have aligned? And I think I'm laying this one off to you from a question standpoint, but how do you make sure, like, key departments like your marketing, messaging, branding, to the admissions and intake, to the business development partnerships, to your alumni coordinator and clinical staff, that they're all aligned with the same why, the same culture? How do you promote that internally?
Yes. So mission, vision, and values, and which pieces of those matter to you. For me, mission and values are sort of everything. And
Mm.
so when I say qualities and attributes, we hire based on those attributes of our core values. So grit, growth, extreme ownership, and trusting relationships or team health. That's everything. People that get that they're drawn in that way, we interview for that, and then we do our referral interviews, based on that kind of stuff. Then we
Mm.
vote based on it. We have a town hall once a quarter and trainings at individual site levels once a month where we highlight, so-and-so is our exemplar for growth this last month, and here's why. And we give a 2-minute thing, and we use that for our monthly one-on-one interviews with team leads on the frontline staff. And so it's just embedded constantly. These are the things that matter the most to us. And then we rally around a big, hairy, audacious goal, a BHAG, that everybody pretty much can recite. They should always be able to. We just had the Joint Commission on site, and everybody was able to say that we are going to take 10,000 guests. We call them guests, not clients or patients. 10,000 guests from crisis, ACE-impacted guests from crisis to capability by 2035. Crisis to capability by 2035. 10,000 ACE-impacted guests. That we worked for months to finally land where we were like, that feels like who we are, what we're trying to do. And once we nailed that, we spoke it for the first time at one training, and people were sitting up like, son of a gun, I'm that organization. That's what I'm doing. I'm working for, dude, I'm in. And that is just a huge rallying point so that we don't get a mismatch. How do you find the places for everybody to gather? And when they're getting a drink at the water cooler, they talk about, dude, I think we've hit 1,000 so far, and we're going to actually hit this by 2035. Or those do organically happen. And we're not giving up on this kid because that's one of the ACE-impacted guests that's having a hard time. And if we stick with her, she's going to turn out okay.
Love it. Love it. Absolutely love it. We have the same internally. We have an admissions track, or we focus. It's not always easy for us to get the actual census admission data if we don't have CRM access and all the different aspects, but we use it as kind of like we get the monthly stats, the census, and we project it. And I'm always, when we have our company kickoffs, our huddles, I'm like, using this case study, we went from 20 patients to 45, but the effect there is that there's a parent, there's a spouse, there's a grandfather that is impacted by that. So we have the same in terms of millions of lives, because we work as, help enabling facilities such as the Hope Group and scaling census and that impact. So I love that. Very powerful, and putting a number behind it that's attainable, calculated, and now everybody's pushing towards it, and it aligns with your why. And no wonder you've been able to scale the Hope Group. So final commentary, a question here. If people that's been listening want to join your organization and help you attain that BHAG, if there is referral partners that want to collaborate with you and create strategic partnerships, how can they get a hold of you? What's the best way?
You bet. Yeah. If you look up The Voice of Hope on Spotify and YouTube, and there's shorts that you can find relative to that. That's our podcast, and really easy to find us that way. And then hopegrouphealth.com, hopegrouphealth.com. You can fill out your information if you wanted to, talk to somebody. Havenwood Academy is another one, .com is our beginning organization, but that's pretty easy to get us. And finally, you could just email me directly. If you don't get an immediate response within 24 hours from Hope Group Health, then you email Ken Huey at hopegrouphealth.com. I'll respond and talk to you for sure.
There you have it. Ken, thank you so much for the great work that you're doing and sharing all these golden nuggets and insight. I know that I'm going to walk away with a couple of things that I'm going to share with my HR and operations team right after this conversation. So thank you for the great work, and be happy to have you again on the Elevate podcast.
No, thanks, Gary. And I want to say, seriously, the same thing. I went immediately, the first conversation that I had with you, I was like, really? Like, here's somebody who gets what to do to put together a business. I was thinking, it was just fun to have an organic conversation where it was like, oh, there's just all this exciting alignment. And what you're doing then with this podcast, thank you. I really do appreciate it.
Appreciate the feedback. It means a lot, and I'm glad it comes across that way. It's coming from deep, and hope that we together can help more folks by standardizing and improving the access to care. So thanks again, Ken. Keep up the good work.
Thanks.